All right, folks. Hope you guys are having a good Wednesday. Which means it's time for the stream. I'm going to get my camera actually positioned here so we can switch over to it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about villains. What I mean by that, what are villains in literature? There it goes. All right, that's slightly better. Okay. Oh, welcome. Let's turn on the lava lamp. Everybody likes the lava lamp. All right, turn that on. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about villains, what they mean in literature, and we're going to kind of do. I covered a lot of this with heroes, so we're going to kind of recap heroes and then talk about villains, because I did talk about villains as a contrast to heroes, and really I wanted to look at more classical definitions and classical expressions of what we're talking about with heroes, and then what it means for modern fiction, especially modern genre fiction, which is what most people are interested in making these days. I do want to draw a contrast with a lot of the stuff I talk about between what people call literary fiction or literature, which is weird, as if other things aren't, and genre fiction, which is, genre fiction has a set of expectations and tropes that the audience wants, versus literary fiction. Those tropes are really directed towards bigger ideas of style that are popular in the academic stream. So, quote, literary fiction will be something that is specifically postmodern, and genre fiction will be something that is trying to fulfill the current expectations for the genre, right? It's more market focused, and the other one's more, focused on an artistic paradigm, is what I would say. So, the word villain really means like peasant. So, it's a weird word to use. It's originally French, is my understanding. So it comes into English by way of French. And a villain is like a bumpkin or a lowly person. So we don't just think about a villain being evil. We think about a villain being bad in the Nietzschean sense, right? So a bad man and a good man. A good man is somebody who's like honorable, strong, has control of his emotions and things. A bad man is somebody who's vicious, weak, right? That's bad in the Nietzschean sense. So classical villains were like Untermensch. They were bad men. They weren't necessarily evil, but they usually were evil as well. And so one of my favorite examples of a classic villain is actually Shylock from Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. So if you've never seen a production of this, or you could just read the play if you want, he's a controversial figure now more because of his ethnicity and how that ethnicity is expressed through his traits, right? He's a greedy Jew. And so as part of the time that Shakespeare wrote that, and the medieval sentiment and the medieval relationship between Jews and the more native populations throughout Europe, he's not really out of bounds for what was going on there. He's not special, and in fact would be an expression of a general feeling about certain members of the Jewish community that were usurers. And this is a big thing if you dig into the history of banking and the monetary history of Europe, is that Jews very often ended up in the usury business. And if you don't know what usury is, it's charging interest on a mutuum. And I have a whole article on my Substack that goes into very deep detail what usury actually is, because most people have no idea what usury was or what the sin of usury was for practicing Christians throughout the Middle Ages and into modernity. It's often forgotten. It's really probably a cause, especially it's weird that Pope Francis hasn't taken it up, considering he tends to be a little bit more left-leaning politically, at least that's the impression that I get with him, to not take up usury, which I think is such a consequential thing now. I mean, usury could destroy the financial security of the United States. Right? We have like $1 trillion worth of student loans. All of those loans are by definition usury. They're charging interest on a mutuum. So that's different from like a mortgage. Okay, a mortgage is charging interest on a physical piece of property that you're using. So you're charging interest to use the property. Like a car loan, you're using the car. So technically the interest is for using the car, not the money. That stuff's important because making personal loans would be usury if you're charging interest on them. You can make them out of charity and not charge interest on them. But Jews often end up in that business, and so Shylock is sort of an expression of that distaste in there. But he is especially villainous in that he is not just somebody who wants his money back, right? He's not just a usurer that's in the business of getting his money back and making money. He's somebody who is particularly vindictive with the pound of flesh. So he has not only an evil intent, he has a bad intent. He's greedy, he's lustful, he's wrathful. He takes joy in the idea of actually killing a person through debt. Right? That's a real portrait of a villain. A villain is an expression of vice as much as a hero is an expression of virtue, especially once we get into the Middle Ages and later. If you're looking at really classical works, you'll notice that most antagonists are not what we would call villains, right? Whether it's like Dido and Aeneas or something like that, right? An antagonist in a story, or if it's like, Troy versus Agamemnon's Greek forces, like who's the antagonist? Really, it's almost like it's like, is Paris of Troy the antagonist? Yeah. Is he a villain? He's not a villain. Not what we would think of as a villain. Rather, that classical story is about two sides of great men and heroes having a clash. The concept of a villain, like what we're talking about and what we see in genre fiction, is really something that develops later. But I think we start to get a taste of it by the time we get to Shakespeare. And I think Shylock is a great example. You could look at antagonists in a variety of his plays, the tragedy of Julius Caesar. You'll notice that, say, Cassius has specific vices, but they're not as pronounced as Shylock. It's not like Cassius is not a bad man. He has noble intentions, but he's prideful about what he's doing, right? Whereas Shylock has no noble intentions at all. He has only ignoble intentions. So that's the difference between like a villain and merely an antagonist. And so that gives rise to today people that call like, anti-villains, right? Which is I don't know if I coined the term or if someone gave it to me and then I did a thing on it. It's like, what's an anti-villain? Well, he's just an antagonist who is good. Whereas an anti-hero is more like a hero that lacks virtue and lacks strength. An anti-villain would be somebody who's cast in the role of an antagonist, but is actually good intentioned, and is doing good things for good reasons. That would be, like the marshal from Fugitive, right? So generally a good guy who's also the story antagonist on some level, pursuing the hero who, may actually be a bad guy, right? So anyway, the point of a villain, if you want to make a good villain, here's what you want to do, is you want to start with why the villain wants to be the antagonist of the story. So first we need to start with the story role. What is an antagonist and a protagonist? I talked about this in earlier streams and I've written articles about it. The protagonist is not just the main character, right? Not every story has to have a defined single protagonist. That's prescriptive. We're trying to do descriptive and then use those techniques to make good stories. So a protagonist is the one who is actively making the story happen. He's doing stuff. He's doing the protagging. So he is actively pursuing a goal, and the antagonist is therefore the person who's trying to stop him from achieving the goal which the protagonist is actively pursuing. So a villain is usually going to be in the role of antagonist. And his reasons for stopping the protagonist, he needs to have reasons that are going to make sense to him. But if we want a really good villain, we want villainous intent with those reasons. He wants to stop the good guy because of lust, right? Like, let's say we're going to write a basic romantic comedy. We have a protagonist who's in love with a girl. We have an antagonist who doesn't want that protagonist to get that girl. Why? Because he is lusting after that girl himself. And his desire for the girl, we're going to make creepier, right? So we want to hype up the villainous, lecherous nature of it. Maybe he's specifically expresses lecherous thoughts, right? He's like thinking of her like, undressing her. He's thinking of her in a sexual situation. He is maybe like trying to steal her underwear, like in Revenge of the Nerds or something like that. He's doing bad things to pursue a lust that he has for that. So we create like a basic love triangle, and the antagonist is on one leg of that, trying to stop the protagonist for his own lustful, lecherous reason. So what's his main villainous trait? It's lust, right? He has lust and jealousy of the protagonist, of the main character. And so that makes a really good villain that we want to see fail. A trope that has emerged over the last few years is trying to make villains that are very sympathetic, or whose reasons are, at least in the minds of the filmmakers, valid on some level. So I'll think of like two examples from Marvel movies, because for whatever reason, I seem to see it in these blockbusters more than I think a lot of other kinds of movies. I'm not sure what like Patient Zero is for this, but it might be, mob movies or something like that. I'm not sure. But anyway, you have a reason, and the filmmakers may believe in that reason. So like Killmonger from Black Panther has this reason to want to take over, was it Wakanda? Because he feels like black people are oppressed or whatever. He really becomes like Black Hitler. So to me, he's still very much like evil. Like he wants to use Wakanda to like wipe out other races and establish a like Afrocentric Wakanda dominated empire, right? So he's basically Black Hitler. So he never loses like his villainous side, even though we have some backstory that's somewhat sympathetic for him that kind of shows you why he might be that way. I think that's probably a better way than what they did with Endgame, right? Endgame, they had Thanos, a super powerful being that is probably very intelligent, buying into Malthusian IYI garbage, and that just means to me that the filmmakers bought into it on some level, or they felt like it was a compelling enough motivation that they wanted to have him have it, rather than what he had in the comics, which is he was just basically psychopathic and wanted to impress the personification, like this goddess of death herself. So what was the problem with that? That people who didn't really think about Thomas Robert Malthus's bad theories were like, well, Thanos was the good guy because he was trying to save life on the galaxy. It's like, only if you are like Thanos, like stupid and don't understand how like population growth curves work or whatever, trying to snap half the people out of existence to save, because resources are finite. It's like, you do realize that like populations double, every couple of decades. He just, the filmmakers didn't think that deep about it. And what's really weird is that because they didn't like dig into why that was bad, or didn't emphasize how bad that was, or didn't present any alternatives from the good guys, people were like, well, I guess Thanos was the bad guy. So that's kind of a more recent and modern thing, I think, is to like emphasize the tragic backstory of the villain. I don't think that that's necessary, and it can actually, I think, harm the effectiveness of your writing if you are doing that in lieu of really making the villain villainous. I think it's better to make the villain really hateful and really evil so that people really don't want him to succeed. Okay, so he has to have reasons to oppose the protagonist, and he has to basically be in an antagonistic role. To make him really villainous, though, we have to give him some sort of vice. I think the best way to look at this is like the 7 deadly sins, right? What are the 7 deadly sins? There's like pride, lust, greed, wrath, or anger, right? Like any vice that you look at. In fact, I'm just gonna Google them so I make sure I'm not forgetting any, right? Yeah. What do we have? Gluttony. Yeah. Gluttony, lust, greed. Let's see here. Yeah. Gluttony, lust, greed. I guess sorrow or sloth, really. Wrath, vainglory, which is, I guess, pride. Or no, there's pride and vainglory. And then despair, right? As some of the classical ones, right? So you pick any one of those that is going to be like your main thing. Like wrath would be, I want to kill everyone because of some dumb reason. Envy would be, I'm jealous of the protagonist. Pride would be, somebody is offending, I'm the best skier. How dare the protagonist come in and win a ski competition, right? Be pride. And those sorts of, so you just pick one or two or pick several that I think are really good to emphasize. The big ones you're going to see are greed, right? Wants an excess of wealth, wants an excess of stuff. Lust has sexual perverted desire towards something, or pride. Those are the big ones that I think you're going to see a lot. The other one that I think works well is gluttony. So if you look at like Duke Harkonnen from Dune, because Dune 2 is out, which I haven't seen. I don't know if I'll be able to see it because it's so hard to go to the movies for me. It just doesn't fit into my life really well at all at this point. To like, especially for something long like Dune, to like leave my wife and kids at home for 4 hours. And it's like, why don't you hire a babysitter? It's like, that's $100 to go see Dune at a certain point. Like, nah, it's not worth it to me when I don't think the movie's going to be good. Based on my review of the first movie and just the general style of what the director does. So Harkonnen is a glutton. He's fat. He's so fat he has to be held up by suspenders. In the book, he also has lust. He looks lustfully upon his nephew. Right? So he's like a homosexual pederast and also a glutton. Frank Herbert knew what he was doing. He's full of greed for the wealth of Dune. He's basically hits like every deadly sin. He's a great villain, and we want to see him dead because of the extremity of his vice. It's not just that he's opposing Paul or he's opposing Paul's father. It's really that he's a wicked and a lowly man in a high position. A lowly man is king. A man who's subject to the vices, to all of his passions, has self-control only in so much as he can use it to be wrathful against those who he doesn't like. He's a great example of a villain. And the gluttony there, how does gluttony affect the plot? It doesn't. It's just a trait to make him more hated, to make him so grotesquely fat. And David Lynch did a much better job with Harkonnen than I think Denis Villeneuve did. He gave him like boils and stuff. He made him so disgusting that there's no way you could ever sympathize or root for him at all in any way, shape, or form ever. Right? Make your villains physically disgusting. That's another thing too. We talk about low men, Untermensch. The low men. They're physically ugly. So a good thing to do with villains is to not make them beautiful, unless it's part of like their personal pride or vanity, their vainglory, right? So a female villain can be very vain, like Snow White's mother. But usually you want to make your villain ugly, so people don't like him, especially if you're in the movie area or video game area where there's a visual representation, or comics, if there's a visual representation of your villain. You want to make him just as disgusting as possible. You want to make him ugly. That's the best kind of villain. I'm going to take a look at the chat real quick before I go further. Yeah, the amount of people who sympathize with Killmonger's telling. It's so counterproductive. You want to say billions, so you kill billions, right? His point was like, oh well, they'll because they won't have their resources stressed. they'll be happier, like everybody's in a perpetual state of starvation. This doesn't jive with the evidence, right? So I'm going to point that if you make a villain too good and the hero too edgy, it's basically them fighting for the same thing, but going about it differently. I like more black and white. Most people do. They want to be invested in the protagonist. I'll talk about some of my favorite villains, I guess, from recent literature. Currently running a Wild West campaign. My players gave a 12-foot-tall, pale, crimson-eyed lizard beast with a savage intelligence. How can I make that intimidating? It sounds intimidating right there, but I don't know. I'm not into story campaigns. I'm into games. We'll talk about that some other time. I don't really play tabletop stuff anymore, though. I don't have time. The more one analyzes Black Panther, the more clear it becomes that its makers intended the audience to agree with Killmonger's. I think they're supposed to sympathize with his motives, but not his execution, which is why at the end you have just a different approach. They decide Wakanda's going to come out and we're going to positively help Africans rather than try to kill all the white people, which just, turning yourself into like an evil empire doesn't, it's not good, right? Like, can we just directly help the people who need help? So there's a different solution that's presented at the end. But I do think you're supposed to at least sympathize with Killmonger's like motivation, being like cast out. He's like a fallen angel. He's like almost a satanic character. He's been like cast out from Wakanda, his father's because of his father's doing. Dune somewhat subverts this because the villain is a gross, vicious person, but the hero ends up killing billions. Well, the hero wants to avoid it too, and he's trying to figure out a way to avoid it. I like God Emperor of Dune. Like, we keep remaking the first Dune book, and honestly, it's the best one. And I'll tell anybody that's interested in reading the Dune series, like, it's okay to just stop after book one. Like, all the power and all the good storytelling's in book one, and then it's kind of a mixed bag after that. I would say book one, just Dune is good. I like God Emperor of Dune and God Emperor of Dune. Children of Dune is also good. God Emperor of Dune is mega weird, but that's part of what makes it good. And then what's after that one? Chapter House Dune? Or there's two, I think. Chapter House Dune was the last one. I think that one just ended. It just like ended on a cliffhanger, and then Frank Herbert died. So I would probably stop after God Emperor of Dune. And Dune Messiah is like the shortest book and also kind of the most boring. It's probably the worst book of the series. A weird thing to say, but there you go. Is it possible to create a villain so over the top that it sort of turns into a silly character? Like, you still have to believe people will follow them and obey them. Yeah, well, I mean, they do it in cartoons, so yeah. It's Garmadon. You don't have to like peel the layers away and be like, why don't all the generals quit? You just have that scene where like the generals that he fired try to eat Garmadon or throw him into the volcano or whatever. Right, so yeah, I just have a Garmadon. I was watching the Lego Ninjago movie with my son, and Garmadon's a really funny sort of villain. And Garmadon's a great villain because not just he's like evil, he's lustful, he's greedy, but he just like doesn't care about his son really. And he even has like a weird little arc where he like learns to care about his son. It's a pretty funny character. Do you think self-aware villains can be done right? I don't know what self-aware means, so I presume all villains are self-aware, whether they're Sauron or someone else. What are your thoughts on when the protagonist and the villain are the same person? Example, Macbeth. So that's an example of a tragic hero, not a villain. Okay. But let's talk about Macbeth. Macbeth is a tragedy. The tragedy of Macbeth is that the lust for power overcomes his faculties of good judgment and causes him to do evil, which sets him on a path which will result in his ruin. This is a really common way that you frame tragic heroes, right? Tragic heroes suffer a downfall because of some bad decision they make or some flaw in their thinking, some vice that intrudes upon their otherwise healthy and noble character. So again, we have the element of vice that causes the person to make bad decisions. Remember, sin dims the intellect. And I think you get a more pronounced version of this Greek. If we're comparing Greek tragedy to like Shakespeare, there's a lot of things that have developed between like Greece and the Globe Theater, where you get a different emphasis on what a tragic hero is that he's got virtues, but there's some vice that intrudes upon those virtues and causes him to make wrong decisions because sin dims the intellect. This is a medieval way of thinking too. But it's a really helpful way of thinking, I think, is that a lot of people think of sin as something you do, especially in our like more Protestant society. Like you do a sin. But classically, medieval and before, right? Sin is also something you have. And this is still present in Orthodoxy. It's still present in the Catholic Church. Sin is not just something you do, it's something you have. It's like a sickness that afflicts your being. That's why Christ is the great doctor, is the great healer, right? So sin is something that you get healed from. Sin is something that darkens your intellect, makes you unable to perceive reality and act with freedom. Sin is something that causes you to do things that are bad for you and you actually don't want to do. St. Paul talks about this. It's like the sin makes me do things that I don't want to do, right? It's not me that does them. It's like my sinful nature, right? What is that? So think of it as like an addiction. We have such great examples these days with addiction. So what is an addiction, right? If somebody's addicted to a drug, that drug causes them to do things which they wouldn't normally do if they had full access to their faculties. They are not free. They're enslaved to that drug. They have to get their fix or they feel bad. They may feel so terrible that they're unable to function unless they're able to get that drug to repair their emotional state or repair their cognitive state so that they can feel like they can function, right? So sin is that way, right? And sin can be lots of things. It could be not just an addiction to a drug, but you can be addicted to lust. You can be addicted to greed, to getting money from people. And so like if you're too focused on making money, you neglect your family, you neglect God, you neglect your pets or other relationships in your life, and your wife leaves you and you're like, what happened? Well, you've suffered a downfall. There's many examples besides Macbeth of like tragic heroes. Michael Corleone in the Godfather movies is a tragic hero, not a villain. He starts very virtuous. He's very intelligent. He's very calculating. He's very optimistic. And then he gets transformed into the mob boss by stepping into that darkness and committing that sin over and over again until really he becomes a monster at the end. So that's the downfall. The downfall can be you end up dead, but the downfall can also be you end up evil. You end up monstrous. You end up losing the things that matter to you. Your wife aborts your child and leaves you, right? So that's a tragic hero. And I guess there's a little lecture on that, but that could really be its own thing to talk about tragedy and tragic heroes. The reason tragedy is fun, quote, to watch, it provides a certain emotional catharsis, is seeing something sad and tragic happen. Because we recognize that that's a possibility in ourselves, and then we may even feel good that we are able to avoid that. So emotional catharsis in stories doesn't always have to be, I feel good about this, I have a happy ending, I'm happy with the way things ended, but it can be a tragic catharsis, which can also be very valid as well. But a villain is going to be someone who is not virtuous, right? Maybe it's like an inversion. Like they might have, if they have a good reason to do what they're doing, that's like some small piece of virtue intruding upon their vice rather than the other way around. Do you think, let's see here. It's refreshing that the villain of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is fully detestable. There is no God, that's why I stepped in. Oh, Heretics of Dune, yes. It's refreshing that, yes. would make an antagonist who is heroic in the classic definition be considered too likable by the audience? I don't necessarily think so. I mean, if you're looking at classic stuff, there may be heroic antagonists. I think if you look at, I think you see more heroic antagonists in Japanese media these days than American media and European media, but you can have one. An antagonist doesn't necessarily have to be a villain. So there's this idea that like every story has to have a protagonist. Well, if we look classically, that's not the case. You may have multiple protagonists or no firm protagonist, but rather multiple people who have multiple goals, or you're just witnessing, it's just showcasing a certain important historical event maybe, right? There's lots of ways to tell stories. Likewise, you don't need an antagonist. Like if you have a story about a man trying to survive in the wilderness, like nature itself is the antagonist. That's not a person, right? It's just an obstacle that he has to overcome. That obstacle doesn't have to be another character who has his own goals. We're just talking about how to make a really good antagonistic character, right? Greeks had the gods driving the action opposed to just human motivation of Shakespeare. That's an excellent point. The gods are, in some cases, moving the pieces on the board. In some cases, the human conflict is an expression of the conflict of the gods. I think the Iliad, the Trojan War really begins with a beauty contest between the goddesses, where they ask Paris to judge. And then that sets into motion all of these things which cause all of these great tragedies and deaths. Weren't a lot of Greek plays and stories tragedies? A lot of them were, but they have a different emphasis than Shakespearean tragedy. Shakespearean tragedy tends to focus on the character having some sort of downfall because of a vice intruding on him. So it's post-medieval. Shakespeare's still working in the late Middle Ages mindset, the Renaissance mindset, even though we think of it as early modern, right? So yeah, the emphasis on Greek tragedy, you'll notice, like if you're reading Euripides or like any of these, it tends to be all the actions of the characters tend to happen in the past, and you're like witnessing the fallout of it, if that makes any sense. So it tends to be about bigger ideas of the gods, often deeper ironies like Oedipus Rex. So Oedipus, what's the tragedy of Oedipus? Well, he didn't do anything bad. He has no tragic flaw. Oedipus rather is realizing the deep consequences of the destiny the gods have laid out and expressed through the oracle at Delphi. So if you don't know the story of Oedipus, it's that, his father got this prophecy, I think, and it was that he would have a son that would kill him and marry his mother. And so what do Greek characters always do when they receive a prophecy they don't like? They try to make the prophecy not happen. So he's like, well, I got to kill this baby so that he doesn't kill me. It's him or me. Forgetting that the prophecy is an unavoidable fact decreed by the gods. So, you go leave the infant out for exposure. It gets found by a shepherd and raised far away. He doesn't know that he's the son of the king. He grows up. He gets into a conflict with someone who doesn't know his father, ends up killing him, ends up marrying the queen, which turns out to be his mother, and has children with her. So when you're watching that play, you're just kind of watching the fallout of all that. They're telling stuff in the background. What's Oedipus's downfall? His downfall is just kind of the result of like the gods, I guess. It's not really his fault that he suffered a downfall. So, I know it's a different emphasis with the Greeks, I think. In the end of Macbeth, Macbeth is turned into the antagonist, and Macduff and Malcolm are the protagonist. It even switches largely to their point of view at the end. Well, there's no point of view in a play, right? So we're witnessing it. But Malcolm, so think about, actually, let's flip it. Let's look at another Shakespearean tragedy. We look at, say, the tragedy of Julius Caesar. So who's the hero of Julius Caesar? It's actually Brutus. Brutus is the protagonist. So you'll notice that in these 5-act tragedies, who is doing the active stuff may switch. So I agree with you. Yeah, like Macduff is really the person who becomes like the good guy. He's doing the good things at the end, and Macbeth is trying to stop him at that point. So he has become kind of the villain of the story. But it's Macbeth's actions which create all the conflict, so that's why we usually think of him as the protagonist. But we see the same thing with Julius Caesar. It's called The Tragedy of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar dies in the second act, at the end of the second act, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Brutus kills him. So Brutus has a noble intention for his evil act, and the noble intention is that he believes Caesar wants to be king, and so we're going to kill him to stop that. Then at that point, you notice by the third act, the Brutus is now on the run. So if you know a 5-act Shakespearean format, the first act is mostly exposition. It's setting up the characters. Here's the characters. Here's what they care about. In Act 2, there's going to be some big event that happens. In this case, it would be killing Julius Caesar. In Macbeth, it was whoever he murders. Oh my gosh, blanking. Anyway, you have a murder. And so the third act is the chaos act. That's where everybody is trying to get together and figure out what to do next. And so the third act of Julius Caesar, it's Octavian and Mark Antony becoming the guys who are going to actively pursue the murderers of Julius Caesar, Octavian's father, right? So they become the protagonists sort of in those last 2 acts. So yes, you can kind of change. Things can change. We're not saying like this person must be the protagonist and do all the protagging. He has to do all the active stuff, right? These things can switch as we go. So yes, towards the end of those plays, we end up with different characters who are actively pursuing the downfall of the, quote, tragic hero, the main character. So again, we don't want to think prescriptively like we have to write one protagonist that does everything from beginning to end, or one antagonist that's always the antagonist. But these things, right, these roles can kind of shift around and become a little bit blurry depending on who is doing what and why. So after we have the event in second act, third act, everyone reacts. They come up with their plans in the fourth act, and then the fifth act is the sort of resolution of all the plans. Whose plan ends up working and who ends up losing? And I think it's great, So those are 2 good examples of how that works, actually. Macbeth and Julius Caesar. There's probably Othello is probably also a good example of that, actually. And of course, what is his vice? It's wrath, right? It's wrath. Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy. The things you do fulfill the prophecy which you would like to avoid. Isn't that wild? Another idea of self-fulfilling prophecy, someone's like, you're going to be a great hero. So you put all your energy into being the great hero and then become that, How would the audience react in mythically accurate Thor as an antagonist in a modern work? Would it require the writer to make him villainous in a classic definition or not? I don't think so. I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to make it work. You simply have to have Thor have a goal that's opposed to whoever your more sympathetic protagonist is. You just have to care more about the protagonist's goals than like an antagonistic Thor. In my opinion, if we were to treat the gods the way the ancients treated the gods in their drama and their characters, it would not be hard to see Thor or Zeus as an antagonistic figure. The Greek gods and the Norse gods especially, I should say especially the Greek gods and also the Norse gods. The Norse gods tend to have a little more virtue, but not like, there's a whole myth where Thor shows up at someone's house and ends up getting him killed. And Thor doesn't care at all. I don't care if this giant got eaten by Jormungandr. I don't care, right? So yeah, you can make them, because the gods tend to have a lot of vice, a lot of what we would call vice, because we're thousands of years later where we have a different view of like, I would say the modern West, the default view of like good and bad is virtue ethics. Even if people haven't explored virtue ethics, that's the frame through which we tend to look at the entire dramatic landscape, is through virtue ethics. What is the virtue of the main character? What's the vice of the bad guy? It's very post-medieval, right? It's stuff we inherited from our forebears and our religious, traditions going up to today. And just because people have forgotten a lot of those doesn't mean we're not still interpreting things through that frame. So, you know, Zeus could be vindictive. Zeus is like a sexual predator. Zeus can be many things that are not good. Same thing with Hera, right? It was really funny in they did the Disney Hercules movie. I don't know if you guys saw that. And Hera, I think they still had her be Hera, even though Hercules is his Roman name. So anyway, so it's Heracles or Hercules. He's the son of Zeus and Hera, and like Hera likes him. But if you look at the source, all of his troubles are because Hera is jealous of Zeus having sex with human women, and wants this. Kind of begrudgingly, he ends up becoming deified. You know, this grandson of Perseus and son of Zeus has many troubles befall him because of the gods and not because of some, you know. So Hera is the antagonist. So you could totally do, I think you totally do Thor. Hell yeah. Right? I could think of so many cool, like, deeper level conflicts you could do with Norse gods. Like, you know, trying to gather Einarjar because Ragnarok is coming, and all those motivations. Like the despair of Odin because he knows that he's going to die. You know what I mean? There's an episode of Lost in Space which Thor is an antagonist at first, but not evil. There's an episode of Star Trek with Apollo as an antagonist. So yeah, you can totally do it. And he's not like villainous. I mean, he does have a vice in that he is, I guess, prideful. He wants to be worshipped, right? So there's his vice. He does have a vice. He comes in on and helps the protagonist by the end. Is there a way to do the JRPG trope of the surprise final villain well? JRPGs do it well, a lot. Surprise final villain. I think so. I think so, yeah. I think you totally can. If you're asking for like technical advice on how to do it, it just really depends on the story. I think a good way to set that up is to have a character that's not obviously like the mastermind behind the bad things until something is uncovered towards the end. Then he's more obviously the bad guy. You know what I mean? So it's good if you don't want to pull at the end. It's like a Final Fantasy II where it's like, haha, the real emperor is me, Satan. You know? I think it's better to have like or you know, what was the one, Castlevania Lords of Shadow, where it's like you fight the devil at the end. Every game should have you kill the devil. The Diablo. What's the final boss of Diablo? The devil. That's the final boss. God of War 2008, the God of War Ragnarok portray Odin and Thor as antagonists. I think the gods are kind of always antagonistic in the God of War games. They're always a little antagonistic. I think they do that pretty well. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Roman Polanski's Macbeth ruins the ending. He has Malcolm visit the witches at the end, implying that he will go bad too. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Yeah, what an awful way to pervert, you know? Like, pervert the meaning of that. It's like you're just going to keep doing evil. It's an interesting thought, though. I'm not a huge fan of Roman Polanski, besides the fact that he's a pedophile rapist. I mean, that's enough to not like the guy, but I don't usually like his movies. And it's kind of funny because like I would like avoid his movies, but I've watched several on accident, forgetting that they were his movies. There was one with Ewan McGregor, where it's like, it turns out at the end, this guy was working for the CIA. And it was like, okay. It wasn't a badly done movie, but you know what I mean? Like, my music stopped. Is it because you wanted an ad? Video pause, continue watching? Yes. Thanks for confirming. This is just like the ambient music from my No Talkie channel. I'm gonna fill up some space with it. You know what I'm saying? Arthas is another great tragic hero as well. Yes, he's not just prideful, he has wrath. So he like is willing to burn the ships. He starts to do bad things in his pursuit of revenge and things. As a tragic hero as well, who then later goes on to become the villain, Lich King. Remember when Blizzard's writing was good? Yes. Yeah, so like what's the first really bad thing Arthas does is he kills all the people of Stratholme to stop the plague from spreading. You know? So he does something bad in the pursuit of good, and that basically creates a negative space in the soul where evil and vice can fill in and start taking over. So it's an interesting way to think about a downfall. While we're thinking of villains, you know, what are some of the best villains? I'll give you a few that I could think of from like more recent stuff. I'll tell you the best. If you've ever read the Harry Potter series, the best villain is not Voldemort, it's Dolores Umbridge. She's by far a more compelling villain than Voldemort. And that's because Voldemort is distant. His like big threat is in the past. He's necessarily in the shadows. He's this distant threat throughout the entirety of the books up until maybe the last one where he's really present in things. But he's very distant. But Dolores Umbridge is right there. And Dolores Umbridge has these vices that are really right up front for you to hate. And she's using them against children. She's abusive of children. So she's got a total kick the dog thing. She's hurting kids for no reason. One of those is injustice. She has a lack of justice. So she is wrathful against Harry to the point of where she's dishonest. She punishes Harry for him saying the truth. She executes injustice because of her own pride. She's just a much more compelling villain. And she's this great example of a villain that is the bureaucrat. Bureaucrats make great villains. It's kind of like Shylock, right? She wants to use the steamrolling power of the bureaucracy to crush everyone and everything that is different from her, or that is original, or that is unique. And she wants to crush the hero's ability to oppose the bigger villain of Voldemort. She's just a much more interesting villain. And I think most of the people I talk to that have read Harry Potter, they really like agree. Like Dolores Umbridge is a way worse person than Voldemort in a lot of ways. Voldemort has more direct evils, right? He's like, I want us to take over and I want this society that I'm imagining. But Dolores Umbridge, she's doing it out of a sense of self-satisfaction. She's doing it for what she thinks is best for you and for everybody else, which I think is very compelling. In Mass Effect 2, Samara tells you about her daughter being born with an illness that makes her kill people. She mentions her daughter as a tragic character, not a sympathetic one. That's a good line. Mass Effect 2, it's okay. It's all about the characters, I guess. You could actually side with her daughter and get her daughter on your party instead of her. And then I think you can actually sleep with her daughter and it kills you and gives you a game over, which was funny. You know what I mean? I've seen argument that Polanski's Chinatown ends with an elite pedo villain winning to indoctrinate the audience to accept such people getting away with it as inevitable. That's interesting. I haven't seen Chinatown in a long time, so I don't really remember it, but there's a reason Roman Polanski can never come back to the United States. It's because he is wanted for a child rape charge where he drugged and raped a 12-year-old. Did anyone watch Dune Part 2? It's getting all the hype, but I thought it was maybe 6 out of 10. I said that with Dune 1, and I realized, so I did this review for Dune 1 where I didn't give it a specific score, and I realized that people kind of hallucinate what they want to hear. So Dune 1, if I were going to give it a score, I'd give it like a C-, 7 out of 10. That's a C-, guys. With any grading rubric, right? 5 and lower are various shades of F. So it's okay. And if I had seen that directing style and that music in any other movie, that probably would have killed it on its own. It's the most yellow movie I've ever seen. But that kind of works because it takes place on a desert planet. Everything is so sparse. But that kind of works. It kind of goes with the desert, right? It's terribly casted. Timothy Chalamet is like the most waifish, effeminate Paul Atreides I could imagine. Awful. You can barely understand what he says because he's just half whispering, half crying it, half moaning it in every single line. Terrible choice. Probably the worst casting choice I could think of. Besides Chani, the ugly Zendaya. Cast an ugly female lead. I don't know why she gets work, but anyway. Doesn't fit with the Chani in the books. That's for sure. Especially compared to, who was the original one? Who did the, what was her name? The original Chani from 1983 Dune? Or 1984 Dune? Sean Young? No, the older actors looked so much better. And it had the worst soundtrack that Zimmerman's ever done was Dune 1. It was abysmal. Easily the worst single part of the movie was the soundtrack. Just unlistenable. But it kind of fit with the stark nature of the desert. So that soundtrack approach in any other movie would have been like, I can't continue watching this movie. With Dune, it was like, it's kind of okay. It kind of worked. That's what it was. People were like, oh, I loved it too. It's like, I didn't love this movie. I think Lynch's Dune is superior in every conceivable facet, especially the director's cut. The ideas of the book are more present in Lynch's Dune. It's more colorful. The set design's way more memorable. It's way creepier and weirder. The villains are more powerful. Everything about it is better. But people read into that kind of stuff what they want to read into it. The main reason I got to watch Dune 1 was it was on HBO. It premiered on HBO, and I had HBO Max, so I was like, I'll just watch it at home. It is such... The only times that I have to go to the cinema, the cinema's open during normal people times. My free time usually happens after midnight. So going to the cinema is really hard for me. And for me to lose 2 hours, and frankly, it's a financial thing too. It's I think Dune would maybe make me money if I reviewed it, but I don't know at this point because the channel's been on such a long decline. I don't think I would get access to the algorithm to give a good review. And frankly, the algorithm would only pump the review if it was a negative review anyway. So if I'm not giving it an F, it's just not going to show up in anybody's feed. We got to be real about it, right? So I'm going to lose 3 to 4 hours of my time to watch a movie. If I had 4 free hours, there's 20 other things I'd rather do with it than watch any movie at this point. I just don't really like modern movies very much. And going to the cinema is a pain in the ass. So I just don't like to do it. Especially, and you think about it, it's I'm not confident I'm going to enjoy the experience. It's expensive to me. It's expensive in terms of time, which I have very, very little free time as it is already. Unless I'm going to get paid a lot of money to do it, I'm just not going to bother to see a lot of movies. And it's not like this is a movie that my wife is going to go see with me. She doesn't care about that at all. Her taste in movies just doesn't overlap with mine at all. So it's really go sit in the movie theater by myself and watch a movie that I'm not really hyped about at all, to probably not make any money from it. If I do it, it's because people on the channel have personally asked me to do it, which is why I do a lot of things, is that real people ask me to do them. Even though I don't make money on them, I do them because there's somebody who wants me to do it. It's a weird thing, but it's otherwise I just wouldn't be motivated to do most things. I think the bar is really low, frankly, for modern movies. There's a cool style, I guess, to Dune. The choreography was really bad in the first Dune. It looked so silly. It looked awful. Awful soundtrack, boring sets, there's definitely cool moments, like the Sardaukar weirdness. There's cool, weird moments. I don't like Villeneuve's style. It's not for me. That's okay. Other people can like him if they want. My favorite Star Wars villain is Darth Plagueis. Darth Plagueis the Wise. Is it Darth Plagueis the Wise? Sadistic, patient, manipulative, and trying to dominate the Force itself. It's not a tale the Jedi would tell you. I can't tell if the bar's been lowered or if I'm out of touch. Classic Simpsons meme. The biggest problem I have with the Dune movie is I have not read the book. I would be lost. Yes, I said that with the first one. And the reason I couldn't really recommend the first movie, even if you're like, oh, I agree with you, I loved it. I'm like, I'm not recommending it. It's not a full movie. It's half of a movie. It just ends nowhere. What a terribly unsatisfying ending that first one had. Hans Zimmer was miscast. Hans Zimmer's way overrated, but he works with Pirates of the Caribbean. He doesn't even orchestrate that music, by the way. He improvises things on a synthesizer, and then a bunch of USC graduate students turn it into a score for the orchestra. I think he doesn't even read music. Distant tribal screeching. It's just a hypothesis, but I wouldn't be surprised if Polanski sicked the Manson family on Sharon Tate. Whoa. That's a cool conspiracy theory. Some of my favorite villain movies are No Country for Old Men and Shutter Island. No Country for Old Men has a great villain. It just doesn't really have any kind of conclusion. The movie just kind of evaporates at the end. And it's based on a Cormac McCarthy book. He's a very postmodern writer in that sense. So I said that to someone and they got upset that I called him postmodern. I'm like, he doesn't use punctuation. That's a postmodern thing right there. So of course stories just kind of evaporate. If you ever read Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, I'm sorry. The infinite jest is that there's no story and no ending. It just kind of... Ugh. I wrote 1,500 pages and then it got published. That's Infinite Jest. People love the Dune score. They're wrong. It sounds like the same throughout. Not so memorable. No themes, no musical cues, just immersion electronic music. And the thing is, they're not wrong. I said they're wrong, I'm joking. But it actually works for the movie. As much as I hate the score and I think it's stupid... the little synth improv, it's I do this my Appleton's not here. I'll go, I can go make the score for Dune right now. I'll just do it in Ableton. I can improvise dumb little synth cues, find some cool textures and throw it on there. That would be a fun thing is if you could get a no score version of Dune and have music students do improvised alternate scores for Dune. I would totally do that. That would be a lot of fun. Most of the reviews of Dune Part 2 I've seen have been positive, except that book fans don't like some of the changes to Channing. I've heard Chalamet mans up by the end. Yeah, maybe he does. I think in the first movie he was so pathetic. I just hated it. I hated seeing him. Plus, I couldn't understand what he was saying. He's whispering everything. I didn't like the sound design. There's so many things I didn't like about the first movie. It kind of works, the whole thing works overall, I guess. But there's so many problems with it. There were so many bad choices, I felt like. The 2000 Dune miniseries will always be my favorite adaptation. It did its best to tell the story of the novel, and the guy who played the Baron was amazing. I've kind of said this before. I think Dune, the Dune universe, is kind of unadaptable, and people get excited about adaptations of their favorite books, and they really shouldn't because they're always borked. We should really be excited that books are just books. Is there ever going to be a Book of the New Sun adaptation? I really hope not. I hope that doesn't ever get adapted. They'll take Gene Wolfe and they won't know what to do with him. No one can hum the Doom score. That's why it'll be forgettable. It's like all those happenings, concerts that are in the moment and then you don't remember it. Zimmer composes experiences. That's a good way of putting it. Zimmer in the past has done really good melodies. People hum the Pirates of the Caribbean score all the time. But, it does just sound like somebody improvising ambient synth music. That's what it's, and that's pretty much probably what he was doing, He might have done it in a weekend. Who knows? Dune and Warhammer 40k are probably unadaptable, although the best luck to Henry Cavill. I think 40k might be more adaptable, except for the production expense. Since we're talking Dune, there's a hint that theme in God Emperor Dune, self-destruction, is intentional. Have you heard Zimmer's Man of Steel score? It's terrible too. The new Wonder Woman theme was pretty good, but that was Junkie XL, not Zimmer himself. This is a good point. But well, I mean, like, yeah, I've always thought Zimmer was overrated. He's not my favorite. Hollywood has to adapt books. They can't make original movies. This is true. This is why they remake everything. Why remake Dune when we've had like all these Dune adaptations? Partly because Dune's unadaptable, but mostly because they just don't have ideas. Hollywood is creatively bankrupt at this point. Lion King score was good. Who did Lion King? Well, I know Phil Collins did a bunch of songs. No. It was Phil Collins did Tarzan. Who did the song in The Lion King? Was it Elton John? Elton John. Lion King did a pretty good job. I think I remember Brandon Sanderson hoping to get Hollywood to make movies of his books. Ultimately, I think he decided to write the screenplay himself. I could be thinking of someone else, though. Brandon Sanderson, news about Brandon Sanderson. So he has basically met with people from Amazon to change Amazon's royalty structures because they're not fair to authors. Crazy that he is, first of all, willing to do that, but second of all, has the power to do that. That just shows how popular Brandon Sanderson's books are. It's weird that we haven't gotten a Brandon Sanderson adaptation. What Brandon Sanderson book do you guys think would be able to be turned into a series or a movie? I mean, they already borked the Wheel of Time one, so I have to think, like, which one are they going to bork the least? I mean, I would love to see, like, Way of Kings. I think that would be a cool production. But like half the book is almost irrelevant because it's Shani's story. It's only relevant like to like later books. So I still think that's probably like one of my top 10 fantasy books. It's just really well done. I don't always like what Brandon Sanderson does, but sometimes he does books that are just knocks it out of the park sometimes. That first Mistborn book was really good. That could be adapted. And that would be like a cool kind of diesel, I don't know what to call it, not diesel punk, clock punk almost. Something like Thief, like dark atmosphere. It'd be really good. Glad Elric never got an adaptation. They would ruin my favorite anti-hero. Maybe they would do Elric right, though. I don't think you could ruin Elric. I think most people, I don't think you could, excuse me, I don't think you could ruin Elric. I find that Zimmer does better work for some directors than others. That's probably true. He usually does good work for Ron Howard and Gore Verbinski, but not Christopher Nolan or Zack Snyder. No, that's a good point. I don't know what factors cause that, though. I thought The Lion King had a good soundtrack. The original one. I didn't watch the weird CGI one. That one just looked awful. They should have done a little screen test of their little CG lion cub and be like, we can't make this movie. Someone said Elric, Razorfist is going to come out of the shadows to bash Witcher. I still don't see Geralt of Rivia as being Elric-like really at all. Other than they have white hair. Elric's a good anti-hero, though, because he's weak, he's physically weak, he's morally weak. He wants to be good, but he can't be because of his own sinful failings. He's a good anti-hero. So yeah, what are some of my other favorite villains? Let me think of a couple. I always liked Lex Luthor. He's like just motivated by greed mostly, right? It's a greed and pride thing. Lex Luthor has always been like a good hero. He's the opposite of Superman in a lot of ways, right? He's just he's not physically strong. He has to use other faculties to try to oppose Superman. He's a good kind of counter villain to Superman. Get that kind of stuff. Or I meant the 90s Lion King soundtrack too. Love the score. Zimmer definitely can compose. Do you like Thulsa Doom for Conan? Yeah. Thulsa Doom is an excellent villain. So Thulsa Doom is... what are his vices? His main vice is like a kind of a lust for control over others, and a not caring about other people. He provides, like, the whole speech is like, I'm the wellspring from which you flow. He provides Conan the impetus for him to be great. And he basically asks Conan, can you be great without a great goal? And Conan basically says yes and chops his head off. I don't need you. Whether I became great because I hate you or become great because of my own struggles, it doesn't matter. But I will take my revenge on you. And then I will go do what I will. Again, another kind of Nietzschean theme. Superman. Mr. Dark from Bradbury's Somewhere Wicked This Way Comes. Oh! Okay. I'll do some content on this. C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. You have some really good villains. There's the scientist Weston from the first one, Out of the Silent Planet. He's also the villain in the second one, but it's weird in the second one. So in the first one, he's the villain. He takes what's the main character's name? I'm gonna look it up just so I don't bork the names. I read this again not too long ago. Yeah, Dr. Ransom, the philology professor. He's the protagonist. So he is like very curious about learning about the aliens. Dr. Weston wants to exploit them, right? He's got a greed to what he wants. There's such a good contrast between them. And then when we see them in Paralandra, Ransom is serving God and Weston is serving the devil. And so it's the contest in the person of between the fallen man and the redeemed man. The fully fallen man embracing the devil, eventually possessed by the devil, and the man redeemed by God. And the contest is over the new Eve from Venus, and whether the fall will happen on Venus or not. And so the result is, because the redeemed man is able to basically kill the devil, even though it's going to cost him great things. It's not like a Christ-like sacrifice, but it's directionally that in that area. The evil Dr. Ransom, who's trying to use his intellect to pervert the new Eve into abandoning and disbelieving God, basically doing what the serpent does in the Garden of Eden. So Ransom is able to prevent the fall of man by acting with full freedom as a redeemed man. And that's what we talk about when people talk about freedom in Christ. I mentioned like addiction and like how vice impedes your ability to do good. So if you're addicted to a substance, you have to do things to get that substance, which limits your freedom. It reduces your freedom of action. This is freedom in the positive sense. Like, am I free to do something? Am I able to execute my will? Or is an addiction going to prevent me from doing it? So sin is kind of like that. Right. So anyway, I love those ones. There's the third one, though, has this female police officer. I'm trying to remember her name. It's That Hideous Strength is the third one. What was her name? I'm finding a character list here real quick. Miss Hardcastle, the cigar-chomping female policeman. It's just such a great villain because she's an inversion of femininity, right? She's a woman acting like a man. She has no care for other people. She wants to inflict pain on other people, so she has wrath. You have the sort of the tentative head of the nice. It's called NICE, nice. He's slothful. He doesn't do anything, right? They have a head in a jar that they call the head, which isn't really the head of the organization. It's just a head that's possessed by a demon that they listen to, right? There's so much in that. That Hideous Strength is a better dystopian novel and better predicts our time, I think, than 1984 or Fahrenheit 451 or What are some other ones? Any of the other ones that you want to think of from like the 50s, the 40s and 50s. So I think it does a really good job predicting that. It's the horror of the bureaucracy, just crushing people and acting without any care for other people, and then eventually killing people. And it has one of the weirdest climaxes in all of fiction. It's very bizarre. Morality being an essential trait of heroes and good leaders is in the Old Testament. Those who followed God in righteousness prevail. Those who didn't fail or were humbled. Not necessarily. Right? Christ, as an example, is someone who gets tortured to death for being perfect. This happens as well. Right? Joseph is punished. But the whole point of the righteous being punished is that it ultimately brings about greater good, right? My favorite part of the Conan movie was when Conan talks about Thulsa destroying his village, and he casually dismisses it as he was young and looking for steel. Yeah, he just doesn't care. Perelandra does get weird. The floating islands, like the weird clouds, they're naked, like it's a whole thing. Yeah, the third book, Perelandra's an odd. It's kind of the odd one out of the space trilogy for sure. So I don't look at biblical heroes as heroes, because they don't even use that word, right? The heroic tradition is a little something different. Like, you may see some translations of the Nephilim, the heroes of old, right? So there are heroic figures in the Bible, like Samson, but I wouldn't call Joseph a hero. He's merely pious and helps his family, and that's good, right? I wouldn't call any of them heroes in the classical sense. They're not like strongmen. Maybe David's a hero, right? He has heroic qualities. These are heroic qualities, but because this is not like because the Bible is not purely a literary thing. Even the Iliad's not purely literary, But I tend to not think of Bible stories in these terms, like heroes and villains. But you notice that the evil people in the Bible are often villainous, right? They have bad traits to them. They're greedy and evil and selfish. The Bible is actually older than the Greco-Roman in a lot of ways. If we look at the Torah predates when we write down a lot of those myths. So a lot of our copies of the myths, a lot of where we get our myths from, is actually later Roman stuff, like Ovid, that we rely on because people weren't always writing them down. We have to kind of piece them together in different places to get those myths. There's no Bible where like you've preserved one book for a long time. The Prestige is an interesting film for protagonist versus villain perspective. Audience probably roots for Bale, but they both fit a grade of villain dedicated to owning a trick at any cost. Yeah. I thought the mule from the Foundation series was a pretty interesting villain. Christ and Joseph both prevailed, though. Yeah. But they're not heroic. Like, this is not like a heroic thing. It doesn't fit into the categories we're talking about. Nor would I want to do that with the Bible. Nor would I want to plug it into telling a story, because it's true, right? Now, there are literary genres in the Bible. That's important, especially if you read something like, what am I thinking of? Sirach. There's literary genres in the Bible. That's true. But to think of them purely in terms of like literary archetypes misses what's really going on there, I think. Yeah, I mean, David has heroic characters. I think when I think of like a Bible character that fits with the heroic paradigm from the Greek tradition, it's probably Samson. David to an extent, even Saul to an extent. David probably more than Saul. David is really a messianic figure. He prefigures Christ in a lot of different ways. And Christ is the fulfillment of David. There's so many more layers, and the emphasis is so different. I don't want to put it in a literary frame. I don't think that's helpful for understanding the Bible or for the points that I like to make about, say, villains. We do have an interesting thing if you think of Joseph, like the lustful Pharaoh's wife who punishes him for being chaste, and that injustice that provokes can provoke some strong emotions. I'm fine with reading only the Foundation trilogy. That's like an interesting point. Yeah. I mean, it's like looking at Dune. It's like the best place to stop with Dune is the first book. The second best place is God Emperor of Dune. The third best place is Children of Dune. And then after that, you should just read all of them to get the whole thing, you know. I can't even remember what happens in Chapter House Dune. But I think Frank Herbert was going for this, like, the golden path, and was trying to reveal, like, I think he had it set up for, like, a crazy alien invasion that they would all have to fight or something. But at least that's what I gathered from, like, God Emperor Dune. But he didn't live long enough to kind of fully realize that. Yeah, we're all villains to the leftists. It's okay. All right. We're getting on here. I thought it might be fun to do a bit of a live write. So I'm going to take just like a 5-minute break and grab a snack and some more to drink. And then I will work on the live write document for a little bit. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I made a nice loaf of bread for my family. They took it with them to my mom's house to hang out there. So I got no bread. Little snack. All right. Let's see if I can find. First of all, let's check the chat. All right, let's find the document. That's so many windows open. Oh yeah, Live 12. I got Live 12. I have not had time to experiment with that. It's one of the reasons that I haven't put out music in a couple days. Where is it? I really need to come up with the title for this little story that we're doing on the live rights. All right. Rather difficult to adjust height of windows now. Don't know how that happened. Okay. All right. Let's take a look here. Let's see how we're doing. I'm using like half of the screen. All right. I tried making homemade sourdough once. It came out more like a hard cookie. Problem with sourdough is that it's like natural leavening. Kind of depends on what's in the air where you're at. You know what I mean? Like if you take a sourdough starter from San Francisco and you take it to Houston, it's just not going to work. Chat here, maybe? This kind of work? All right. See how that looks. Looks okay. All right. All right, yeah, so we just, we killed some weird dudes. We're going in the castle. This is like really, I guess, we're approaching the climax of this little story. I think God Emperor of Dune was the original ending. Well, I mean, I think Leto Atreides II, the Sandworm Atreides. He wanted humanity to be on the golden path to like survive I always thought it was like an alien invasion or something, like coming from outside the galaxy or something else, some other kind of giant threat. It never says they're in like one galaxy, I don't think, but in any event, you know, that's what I kind of thought was the point of the golden path. But I'm okay, like I'm okay with the story ending in any of those places. I think Dune Messiah is the worst place to end. Children of Dune's okay, but God Emperor of Dune I think is just, it's a cool, weird book. It's just a weird, cool book. You know? All right, here we go. Lived as imitations of men as I did. What do you think of characters like General Hummel from The Rock who have good motivations but bad methods? I think that makes it a compelling antagonist. I think it makes a very compelling antagonist. At the end of the day, he didn't want to actually kill people, and then the people that he hired did. So we have a little bit of sympathy for him and kind of understanding why he's doing that. I think it makes him compelling, and it sets up some really good moments of drama. I think that was played by Ed Harris, right? Anyway. The best character ever made with good intentions by bad methods is obviously Thanos. But his cosmic motivation was more realistic, even as stupid as it was. Yeah, people do stupid things. Yeah, it made him like a much more villainous villain. It's like, I'm just going to impress Death. Notice me, Death. Notice me. to spell detritus? Detritus. Who do you think is the best femme fatale villain? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think of seductive or persuasive villains? Also, do you think Paradise Lost sympathizes or glamorizes Satan too much? I'm not going to say it does it too much, but I think it does cast Satan as the hero, you know, in a somewhat heroic light. So I don't know. I need to think about Paradise Lost a little bit more, because I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know what to think about John Milton now. You know, I read it when I was younger, and I needed a lot of help to figure out what was going on. Certainly, it's full of compelling and interesting ideas. I kind of glean that there's somewhat the evocation of a classical sense, in that sort of the heroic searching for your own things against the gods, almost like Odysseus. I don't know. I have to look at it again. I think you probably make the case that it does glamorize the devil too much. Humanizes him too much, maybe. Have we seen the last of Matthew Wellman on the channel? Riders of the Dawn is good stuff. I appreciate that. I'll tell him that. Probably. Probably not. I mean, I might eventually do content with him. He's not in the business anymore, you know? So, whatever. Certainly wish him the very best. Appreciate that. I'll tell him that. That was, that was a fun way for us to make content on our commute. We shared a commute for a year, and we're like, it's how do you reclaim? It was like 35 minutes each way. So how do you reclaim that time? And the answer is, well, do something, like turn it into something productive. So you don't feel like you're losing that 35 minutes to the void. So, we would, in the morning, we would try to record, we'd come up with a topic, and we'd just do like a podcast on the way to work. The way home, we would decompress, we'd talk business, we could do other content, but mostly it was like decompress, talk business. And like I would upload it on my lunch break, and that's what we did. And learned how to be really efficient with that process. Made it a habit and a process, and then produced a lot of work out of it. It was fun. Bye-bye, Fizchoso. Why did my chat end up looking all weird all of a sudden? My chat got really weird. Why are you looking weird, chat? Why did the chat do this? Let's refresh it. New comments. There we go. It's probably my name. Yeah. Your name is a giant bunch of underscores. It's messing it up. It's all right. Faint sound below normal hearing. Negates the portcullis. squeal, shriek. We didn't slam them. They're too big to be slammed. I pushed. Hey, bud. Did you bring back the bread? Did you bring back the bread? Or leave it for Mimi? Okay, I'm gonna eat some. Hey, pups. Can you say hi? Come here. Come here. There you go. Here's the dog. Yes. Arr. Arr. Here, we'll show the dog. I think it's about time to pause this live ride and say goodnight. Because my family is back. Here we go. Now you can see the pups. Say hi, honey bun. It's the honey bun dog. All right. Yeah, I think I'm gonna probably call it here. Once the family's back, I'll have a snack and some dinner. She's just excited. She's not angry. All right. Go give them help. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna call it here. So have a good one, and I'll see you all next time. I'll relink newest Substack, Inoculation Against Insanity. I'll relink everything for the end here. I can't actually read the chat right now. Maybe I can find a way to read it. That's just because somebody has a name that's like a bunch of underscores, and so it's messing up the chat on like this program here, and I can't get it to work. There we go. All right. Yeah. Goodbye. Thanks for the cool stream piece. So cute. I'm currently writing a villain myself, one who doesn't believe she's evil nor acts of any malice. She's driven by intermingled pursuit to bring back her evil. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay. What else do I? Profile. Okay. And there's still a free book offer, I think. So check that out. And I'll see you all next time. Have a great one. So I'll be back next Wednesday. And I'll probably do another live write in the week. I really want to finish this story up. I may just like do some random streams in the middle of the night, like the gaming stream, just to finish this up so that I can get to show you guys the next stage, which is going to be revision and then publication. And I'll show you every step of how to publish a book and how to format it. We'll even make this into a paperback. Once it gets over like the 10, it's going to be about 13,000, 15,000 words. So that length, you could actually turn it into like a little paperback, and it would actually be like a little book. So we'll probably do that. We'll make like a little mini book out of it. It'll be fun. So anyway, have a great one, folks, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for hanging out with me and chatting.